Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have another Commander's Guild deck tech for you. This time it's titled Flying Artisan for episode 18. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is we're going to scryfall.com. We are randomly selecting a card and we are working with a budget of $100 or less and building a deck around a theme of our chosen card. This week, our random card was Siani, Eye of the Storm. It's 3 and a blue for a 3/2 legendary creature Djinn Monk with flying. And whenever Siani, Eye of the Storm attacks, we scry X, where X is the number of attacking creatures with flying, and they have partner. So this is a bit of a unique card, and I'm always super happy when our random card of the week is a legendary creature, because that automatically, for this, makes it the commander for the deck. But Siani having partner led us down a more interesting route with the deck. So I debated on having Siani solo for this, but I decided against it in the end and decided to pair them up with Prava of the Steel Legion, which is a 2 and a white for a 1/4 legendary creature cat soldier. For as long as it's your turn, creature tokens you control get +1/+4, and you can pay 4 to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So there's two major themes here. One is flying. Siani wants us to have flying creatures. And two is tokens. Prava wants us to have tokens. So I decided to combine those two things. And as I was going through the deck, I realized that most of the cards I was finding were actually uncommon or common cards. We had very few rares and mythics in this deck. So in the end, I actually decided to cut every single rare and mythic and turn this into what I believe is called an Artisan deck, which is only commons and uncommon cards. And even without the rares and the mythics, it's still incredibly powerful. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of our themes for this deck. The first one is, of course, flying tokens. We want to make as many flying token creatures as possible. So cards like Spectral Procession, which can be cast for white, or we can replace any of those with 2 colorless mana for a sorcery that makes 3 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying. Nice and simple, straight to the point. And if we're able to get the 3 mana, the white version, it's literally 3 mana, make 3 1/1 flyers. And if we have Prava on board, they become 2/5s. If we have Siani on board, we scry when they attack. So this is incredibly powerful if we have the right setup. Our second theme is going to be pumping up our attacking creatures. We want our flyers to be dealing tons of damage because most flying token creatures are just 1/1s. So Kangi Sky Warden is 2 white-blue for a legendary creature bird wizard, 3/3 flying vigilance. Whenever Kangi attacks, attacking creatures with flying get +2/+0, so that can turn our 1/1s into 3/1s. And whenever Kangi blocks, our blocking creatures with flying get +0/+2. Now, it is important to note this does include Kangi himself, so he will attack as a 5/3 and block as a 3/5. But we have multiple effects in this deck that actually pump up our flying creatures. Usually our 1/1s are never going to actually be 1/1s. They'll be 2/2s, 3/3s, and even on some rare occasions, bigger than that. So Anthem effects is going to be super important for us. And our last theme is going to be protecting our flyers. Very recently in Magic the Gathering, they have printed a lot of cards that care about if you control a creature with flying. So Jubilant Skybonder is a great example. 3 mana, 2/2 human wizard with flying. Creatures you control with flying have spells your opponents cast that target this creature cost 2 more to cast. So if our opponents try to kill one of our flying creatures with whatever spell they're using, they have to spend an extra 2 mana, which isn't super expensive, but in the long run it'll start to drain out our opponent's resources, and hopefully that 2 mana might just be a little bit too much for some of our opponents to deal with. So now that we've taken a look at some of our themes, let's take a look at some key cards in this deck, the cards that really make this deck run. The first one is Archetype of Imagination. 6 mana for an enchantment creature human wizard, 3/2 creatures you control have flying, and creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying. The first part of this, not super important. Most of our creatures fly anyway, but taking flying away from our opponents is huge. If we can have the only flying creatures at the table, our creatures are basically unblockable. Yes, there could be reach creatures on the board, but that's much less common than flying creatures. So if we have a whole board full of flyers, our opponents don't have flyers, they can't block, we have maybe some anthems on board, we can get in for a ton of damage just by having Archetype of Imagination on the board. Another one of our key cards is Reconnaissance Mission. Because we have so many flyers, we have so many creatures and protection spells, we need to make sure that we can keep our hand full. So Reconnaissance Mission is a 2 blue enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. And it is important to note that each creature triggers this independently. So if we hit someone with 5 creatures, we draw 5 cards. And we're going to have tons of little tokens, tons of flying tokens. It's going to be incredibly easy for us to draw 2, 3, maybe even more cards every single time we go to combat. And just in case we don't need this for some reason, it does have cycling too. We can discard it, draw a card, just in case it's not super important or super useful at the moment. And our last key card is Hour of Need. So we've already mentioned that a lot of our tokens tend to be 1/1s. Hour of Need is 2 and a blue for an instant, and it has Strive, so we can target more creatures, but it costs 1 and a blue more for each creature we target. And we exile any number of target creatures, and for each creature exiled this way, its controller puts a 4/4 blue Sphinx creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So if we, at the end of our opponent's turn, have 3 little 1/1s, we can cast Hour of Need, turn our 3 1/1s into 3 4/4s, and then on our turn we're swinging for 12 damage where it used to be 3 damage. So we can really get someone with this card, surprise them out of nowhere, and swing in with a ton of damage that nobody was expecting. Okay, so now that we've taken our key cards out of the way, we've looked at our themes, I do want to point out a couple of cool interactions that I came across while I was building this deck. The first one is between Soul of Migration and Scour the Desert, which is actually a very recent addition because they're both Modern Horizons 2 cards. Soul of Migration is 7 mana for a 2/4 flying elemental creature that when it enters the battlefield, we make 2 1/1 birds with flying, and it evokes for 4. So we can play it for 4, make 2 birds, sacrifice it, it goes to the graveyard. Once it's in the graveyard, we can pay 5 mana for Scour the Desert, which is a sorcery, and exile target creature card from our graveyard. We would target the Soul of Migration, and make X 1/1 birds, where X is the exiled card's toughness, which is 4. So for 4 mana, we get 2 birds, and then for 5 mana, we get 4 more birds, meaning we would wind up with 6 total birds after casting these 2 cards, which doesn't seem super impressive. It's just 6 1/1 flyers. But again, keep in mind, we have tons of ways to draw cards with those creatures. We have tons of ways to pump those creatures. Those 1/1s aren't going to stay small for very long. And our second cool interaction that I want to point out is between Deluge, which is 2 and a blue for an instant that says tap all creatures without flying, and Rally of Wings for 1 and a white that says untap all creatures you control, and creatures you control with flying get +2/+2 until end of turn. So Deluge taps down all of our opponent's creatures, hopefully before they go to combat, meaning that they can really only attack with flying creatures, saving us maybe a turn in there. But the important part is that if they do decide to attack with their flying creatures, because that's all they have left thanks to Deluge, and we have Rally the Wings, we can untap all of our creatures and surprise block them, killing all of their creatures. Or we can use it offensively and attack, tapping down all their non-flying creatures once we've used Rally of the Wings to do extra damage, so that way they can't really attack us back. Meaning that if we can pair these 2 cards correctly, we'll be able to prevent our opponents from attacking us while still dealing tons of damage to them or killing their creatures defensively. Either one is perfectly fine by us. Okay, so now that we've gone through the deck itself, let's take a quick look at the price. Now, as I'm sure you might be able to guess, super cheap this week. No rares, no mythics, nothing fancy. Our total deck price is only $33, which is a third of our normal budget price of $100. So if you want an awesome budget deck, this might be the deck for you. And in fact, the most expensive card in here is Serra Aviary for 3 and a white. It's an enchant world, and it is on the reserve list, which is why it's so expensive. But all it does is give all creatures with flying, not just ours, all creatures with flying, +1/+1. We have tons of ways of doing this in the deck. So you could very easily cut this and put in another sweet flying creature and save yourself $6.50, drop this price below $30 for the entire deck. Definitely not a necessary card. I just figured our budget was so low, there wasn't much of a reason for us not to include it. Now, the last thing we got to do, we've checked out the price, we've checked out the deck itself. We've got to see how this deck actually plays, because we can talk about it all day, but until we see how it actually runs, it doesn't make much sense. So today, we're going to try it against 3 opponents. We're going to have Sithis, Harvest's Hand, which is played by Jason, Gigantha the Wellspring, played by Lena, and Varina Lich Queen, played by Shawn. So Sithis is going to be an Enchantress deck. I haven't played against Jason's deck. From what I understand, it's brand new. So we'll see how it goes, but I do know that Enchantress can be very powerful, especially since you have a 2-mana Enchantress in the command zone. Very scary stuff, so we'll see. I'm hoping, though, that a lot of Enchantresses don't fly, so that might be how we win this one. Lena's Gigantha deck is actually a bit of a gimmick deck. It is built after the Rider-Waite tarot card deck. So every single card in the deck represents a tarot card from the Rider-Waite tarot card deck, meaning there's not too much synergy, but it is a super sweet deck, and I really do hope that she gets to show off some of the powerful stuff that it can do, and some of the cool cards that you really might not see anywhere else. And last, we have Shawn's Varina deck, which is your traditional zombie tribal deck. Shawn's particular build is very powerful and can be very explosive, so they are ones to look out for. I know that zombies don't typically fly, so again, that might be in a bit of our favor. So we'll see how it goes. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I will see you guys after the game for the wrap-up. At the start of the game, I get to go first, followed by Jason, Lena, and Shawn. On our turn 1, we play an island and cast Siren Storm Tamer. Jason plays a forest, Lena plays a command tower, Shawn plays a swamp and casts Graph Harvest, giving all his zombies menace. I play a Gates of Istfell and then attack Shawn for 1. Jason casts a Helm of the Gods, and then plays a Selesnya Sanctuary, returning a forest to hand. Lena plays an island, Shawn plays a swamp, and casts a Dimir Signet. I play a Plains, and then I attack Jason for 1, before casting Kangi's Lieutenant in our second main phase. On Jason's turn, he casts his commander, Sithis, Harvest Hand, plays a forest, and then equips Sithis with Helm of the Gods, giving her +1/+1 for each enchantment he controls. Lena plays a Savage Lands, Shawn plays a Scoured Barrens, gaining a life. I attack Jason and Shawn for 1 each, which becomes 2 when Kangi's Lieutenant attacks. And then in my second main phase, I cast Prava of the Steel Legion, giving my tokens +1/+4 on my turn. Jason plays a Windswept Heath, before attacking Lena for 2 with Sithis. Lena plays an island, and then she casts Corsair Captain, making a treasure token. At the end of her turn, Jason cracks his Windswept Heath to put a Canopy Vista into play tapped. On Shawn's turn, he plays an island and casts Call to the Grave. At the beginning of my upkeep, I sacrifice Kangi's Lieutenant to the Call of the Grave, and then play an Evolving Wilds, cracking it for an island. And then I cast High Alert. This lets my creatures do damage based on toughness rather than power. Then I move to combat, attacking Shawn for 5. At the end of my turn, Jason casts Croson Grip to destroy Shawn's Call to the Grave. He then untaps and plays a Plains, casts an Overgrowth, letting his Plains tap for 2 extra green mana, triggering Sithis to draw a card and gain a life. And he then casts Kadama's Reach, putting a land to play and a land to hand. Moving to combat, he attacks me 3 with Sithis. Lena plays a Companion of the Trials. Shawn plays a Path of Ancestry, and then casts Underdead Warchief, making his zombies cost 1 less and giving them +2/+1. Then he follows that up with Cryptbreaker. On my turn, I attack Jason for 1, and in my second main phase, I cast Battle Screech, creating 2 1/1 bird tokens, and I then tap my 3 white creatures to flash back Battle Screech, making 2 more bird tokens. Jason plays a Forest, and then casts Enchantress's Presence, triggering Sithis and allowing Jason to draw an additional card whenever he plays an enchantment. Lena plays a Thriving Moor, naming Red, and then casts a Chariot of Victory and equips it to Companion of the Trials, giving it First Strike, Trample, and Haste. Shawn casts Verena, Lich Queen, and then attacks me for 6, triggering Verena, drawing 2 cards, discarding 2 cards, and gaining 2 life. In his second main phase, he plays a Swamp. On my turn, I attack Shawn for 20 in the air with the birds, since they get +1/+4 from Prava, and do damage based on toughness. And then in my second main phase, I cast Whirler Rogue, making 2 Thopter tokens. At the end of my turn, Jason flashes out an Omen of the Hunt, drawing 2 cards, gaining a life, and putting a land into play. He then sacrifices the Omen of the Hunt to scry 2. On his turn, he plays a Forest, and casts Satyr Enchanter, allowing him to draw a 3rd card whenever he plays an enchantment. He casts a Seal of Cleansing, drawing 3. He then casts a Soul Ring, and follows that up with Verduran Enchantress, allowing him to draw a 4th card whenever he plays an enchantment. This lets him cast the first Iroan Games, drawing 4 and making a 1/1 human token. He then casts a Wild Growth, letting his Canopy Vista tap for 2, and also draws another 4 cards. Lena casts her commander Gigantha the Wellspring, and at the end of her turn, Shawn activates Verena to make a zombie token. On Shawn's turn, he casts Archfiend of Ifnir, putting a -1/-1 counter on each of his opponent's creatures whenever he discards a card. He then moves to combat, attacking Lena for 15, drawing 4, discarding 4, gaining 4 life, and putting 4 -1/-1 counters on all his opponent's creatures, killing everything except Sithis and Gigantha. On my turn, still missing my 5th land drop, I pass. Jason, in his draw step, that triggers the first Iroan Games, putting 3 +1/+1 counters on Sithis, and then he casts a Johnny's Chosen, making a 2/2 cat whenever he plays an enchantment, casts Karametra, God of the Harvest, drawing 2 cards and making a cat, and he then casts Oblivion Ring, exiling Archfiend of Ifnir. This also allows him to draw 3 cards and make a cat. He then plays a Forest, and casts a Cultivate, putting a land into play and 1 to hand. Lena plays an Indatha Triome, and then taps Gigantha for mana to cast Liliana Dreadhorde General. She activates Liliana's +1 ability to create a zombie token, and at the end of her turn, Shawn activates Verena to make another zombie token. On Shawn's turn, he taps Cryptbreaker to lose a life and draw a card. He would have had to tap 2 more zombies, but unfortunately we don't catch that. And then he casts Utter End to exile the Oblivion Ring, returning Archfiend of Ifnir to the battlefield, before attacking Jason with 4 zombies, letting him draw 4 cards, discard 4 cards, and gain 4 life, which puts 4 -1/-1 counters on all his opponent's creatures. This kills everything except Sithis and Karametra. Jason then blocks Verena and the Undead Warchief, taking 8 damage, killing Sithis and the Warchief. Then at the end of combat, but before damage has been resolved, I cast Aetherize to return Shawn's remaining attackers to his hand. Second main phase, he then recasts his Cryptbreaker. On my turn, I cast Siani, Eye of the Storm. Jason, in his draw step, triggers the first I row in games, but since Jason doesn't control a creature with 4 power, nothing happens. He recasts his commander Sithis, drawing a card and putting a land into play with Karametra. He then plays a Plains and casts a Dark Steel Mutation, turning Archfiend of Ifnir into a 0/1 indestructible bug with no abilities and drawing 2 cards. He then casts a Destiny Spinner, drawing 2 cards and putting a land into play. He casts a Broken Fall, targeting Sithis, drawing 2 cards, and then casts a Heliod, God of the Sun, drawing an additional 2 cards. He moves to equip the Helm of the Gods to Karametra before moving to combat. He attacks Shawn for 11 with Karametra, but Shawn blocks with his indestructible bug. On Lena's turn, she casts a Hierophant's Chalice, draining Shawn for 1, and activates Liliana's +1 to create a zombie token. Shawn plays a Forsaken Sanctuary on his turn, and then he casts a Liliana Death's Majesty. Activating her -3, he returns Undead Warchief to play, and then recasts his commander Verena. He then attacks Liliana Dreadhorde General for 3, drawing 1, discarding 1, and gaining 1 life. On my turn, I attack Liliana Death's Majesty for 3, scrying 1 on attacks, and killing the Planeswalker. In my second main phase, I cast Tide Skimmer, allowing me to draw a card whenever I attack with 2 flying creatures. Then in Jason's draw step, the first I row in games triggers, making him a gold token, and it then goes to the graveyard. He plays a Sun Petal Grove, and then activates Destiny Spinner 3 times, turning 3 lands into 10/10 creatures with trample and haste since he controls 10 enchantments. He equips Helm of the Gods to one of the forests, and then attacks me for 15 and Shawn for 30, eliminating Shawn from the game. Then in Jason's second main phase, he casts a Sterling Grove, giving all of his enchantments Shroud. On Lena's turn, she casts Kenrith, the Returned King, activating him to give me 5 life, in the hopes that Jason won't be able to kill us both. She then activates Liliana's +1 ability to make a zombie token. On my turn, I finally play my 5th land, an island, and then I cast Sprite Noble, giving my flying creatures +0/+1, before attacking Jason for 7, scrying 2, and drawing a card. Jason casts a Courser of Kruphix, revealing the top card of his library and letting him play it if it's a land. He also draws 2 and puts a land to play. He then casts a Setessan Champion, allowing him to draw an additional card whenever he plays an enchantment, and he puts a land to play, gaining a life from the Courser of Kruphix. He also casts Renata, Called to the Hunt, drawing 3, putting a land into play, before activating Destiny Spinner to turn 2 lands into 13 power creatures and attacks me for 31. Before blocks, I cast Rally the Wings to untap my creatures and give them +2/+2, blocking enough to go to 8 damage and killing all of my creatures. Second main phase, Jason casts a Rampant Growth to put a land into play. On Lena's turn, she activates Liliana's +1 to make a zombie token, and then activates Kenrith to return Companion of the Trials to the battlefield. On my turn, I play a Plains, and then cast Aven Gagglemaster, gaining 2 life. In Jason's upkeep, Lena casts a Pale Moon to make all non-basic lands tap for colorless this turn. In response to the spell, Jason sacrifices his Sterling Grove to put Mirari's Wake on top of his deck. Once he casts that, he has more than enough mana with his basic lands to kill Lena and I by activating Destiny Spinner, winning Jason the game. Alright, so that was a fun game. We definitely put up a bit of a showing in the beginning. I think we made ourselves a little too threatening. Putting, 30 power worth of creatures on board that early made us a bit of a target. And unfortunately, Shawn's Archfiend of Ifnir really shut us down. Being able to put -1/-1 counters on our stuff every single turn, it was incredibly hard to come back from that. And by the time we were able to come back from that, Jason had developed just such an impressive board state, there wasn't much we could do about it. But in the end, I do think we put up a good show. I think that if we had survived that Archfiend for one more round, we might have been much better off, but High Alert wound up being the MVP of the game. I wasn't quite expecting that, but with Prava, it definitely makes sense. So I hope you guys enjoyed the game. I hope that you enjoyed seeing the zombies, the flyers, the enchantresses, the tarot card deck. I think they all performed super well, and it was super fun to play against. So if you have any suggestions for future videos, please let me know. I'm always happy to take requests on cards to turn into decks. I do enjoy doing that. And I will see you guys next Friday, where we'll have a brand new video up. And other than that, please leave some comments. Let me know what was good, what we can improve on, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.